Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today's video is really exciting. Happy Valentine's Day, by the way, because this is a brand new book tag that Becky put together, and it is all about your romance reading journey. So I've been very excited to film this video. I was so excited when Becky asked me to be a part of this collaboration because I've actually been wanting to do a video about this for a really long time, and I have talked about my journey in vlogs here and there, but I've never had like a dedicated video just about how I discovered romance and all that other stuff. So this is exciting and very fun, and I think it's just going to be a good time. So I will have everyone who is participating today linked down below. Their channels will be down there. Be sure to check everybody out. There's some older booktubers, some newer booktubers. There's just a great list of people who love romance. So let's go ahead and get into it. I have 10 questions and let's talk about them. So the first question is, about how old were you when you started reading romance, and do you remember the first romance that you read? So I think I was about 14. I think it was like 14 or 15. And like, I grew up a horse girl. We had horses. I was a farm girl. I loved horses so much. I was like obsessed with them. Like, I mean, I still am. But the only books that I wanted to read were about horses. So I read all of like the Black Stallion, the Saddle Club, like anything that was a horse book that was available to me, I read it. I can guarantee it to you. So I was about the age, 14. I was still reading all of my middle grade horse books, and I loved them, and I like didn't want to get rid of them, but I had this feeling like I was too big or whatever. But I really didn't want to get rid of them quite yet. I just loved those horse books so freaking much. So it was my birthday, and my brother knew that I liked to read. My brother's quite a bit older than I am, but he also, I think, was feeling like, you're too old to be reading these little kid books, girl. So he got me this book for my birthday because it was on a ranch, a horse ranch, and he thought it looked like a grown-up book. He didn't know it was a romance novel. I didn't know it was a romance novel. I can guarantee you he wouldn't have bought it for me if he'd known it was a romance novel. But I read it. And yeah, that was the first book that I read that had intimacy on the page. And I was just like, what is this? And I loved it. I loved that book. It was more of like a romantic suspense too. There was a suspense element to it. But that was the first full-on romance that I ever read. And that definitely ignited my love for Nora Roberts, which I then read pretty much only her books from that point on until I was like in my early 20s. I just loved her so freaking much. So that was the first book I read, Montana Sky by Nora Roberts. Okay, question number 2 is, did you deliberately seek out romance, or did you stumble upon it, and how? So this was my question, and the reason that I asked it, Becky asked each of us to come up with a question. The reason why I asked it is because I kind of did just stumble upon it. I probably would have still been reading those horse books until I went to college, to be honest. But I stumbled across romance, and, at that age, 14 or 15, I was definitely interested in boys at school. I had crushes. I loved rom-coms. But when it came to reading, I only wanted to read horse books because I just had so much nostalgia and so much fond feelings for horses, and they were just such a huge part of my childhood that I was very hesitant to let them go and move on to like adult books or anything like that. So I definitely stumbled across romance, and I told you how in the previous one. My brother gave it to me, not knowing it was a romance, not knowing it had one of the most interesting spicy scenes that I have ever read on horseback, still to this day. So okay, question number 3 is, did you start with traditionally published or indie published books? And has it switched? This one was asked by Kelsey. So obviously when I started reading romance, I was 14. Indie romance really wasn't a thing. Kindles weren't a thing. I'm 41, and it was traditionally published were your only option. So I definitely started traditionally published. When I was reading, I think mostly YA at the time when indie romance first boomed in like 2012, but I had a Kindle and I was buying all of these YA books on there that were like $12, $11, and I was just like, this is so expensive to buy an ebook, but I also had this new Kindle and I just really, really loved it. So when indie romance first became a thing, I saw that they were cheap. It's like the most expensive one was like $3. And I was like, okay, I'll try this, So I tried indie romance as soon as it like became a thing. I was just like, okay, let's do it. So Yeah, I became obsessed with indie romance at that time, and that's all that I read for several years was indie romance. Anything that was newly published, Colleen Hoover, you know, like all over the place. Abby Glines, I read a lot of her. S.C. Stevens, I read her. Just like anything that was. I also read Jamie McGuire, which she'll be featured in a later question, you know, and yeah, so I started with traditionally, but that was more just a product of the time because I'm not 20 years old, you know, so. And then has it switched? I wouldn't say that it has switched. I mean, I feel like I read a pretty good blend of both. I read indie romance and I also read traditionally published romance, and I do find myself sometimes getting frustrated with each. I'll find myself getting consistently frustrated with indie romance, but it's for an entirely different reason that I get frustrated with traditionally published romance, you know? So I don't have a preference one or the other. I'm just looking for good storytelling with romance and great writing, and if that is an indie romance, I'll happily read it and shout it about it from the rooftops, and if that's traditionally published, same goes. Okay, question number 4 is, what was a romance trope you were afraid to try but ended up loving? So for this one, I think that I'm going to say second chance romance, which is now probably my favorite trope of all time. I was definitely, when I first, like earlier on in my romance reading journey, when I was probably like in my 20s, the thought of a second chance romance was like, absolutely not. These people are meant to be together. They can't have anything that tears them apart. They fall in love, and then they stay together forever. I don't want none of this second chance stuff, you know? So I was really hesitant about that because my idea of a happily ever after was, at that time, they meet, they fall in love, they stay together forever, you know? Of course, that was my frame of reference, being a young 20-year-old who didn't really understand or have the life experience of what life really actually is and what happens, you know? So now, second chance romance is my absolutely favorite trope, and that's entirely because I love seeing the journey of couples who are in love, who maybe go through hard times in life or in their relationship, or they make bad decisions, but they never ever stop loving each other, even if they end up separated and they find their way back together. To me, that's the ultimate happily ever after now. Finding your way home to your person after, for whatever reason, you couldn't be together, that is the ultimate happily ever after. So second chance romance is a trope that I didn't like. I don't know that I was afraid of it, like the question says. I didn't like it, but now it's my all-time favorite. That has a lot to do with my feelings just in general about people. They've grown and evolved. I no longer think of people in terms of black or white, and if they do this, they're bad, they're evil, and if they do this, they're great and wonderful, you know? Like, that was definitely a mindset that I had in my younger years, where now I recognize that no single person on the planet is entirely good or bad. Everyone sometimes deliberately does stuff to hurt people, and also people very by accident or unintentionally hurt people. And I just feel like I want to see more of that in my romances today, but with a caveat, I don't want it to be over the top drama that's just stupid and I can't suspend my disbelief. So I really want to see complexity and not just one way or the other, you know? Anyway, next question. Okay, question number 5 is there a romance book you read early on in your journey that you would rate differently today? This is by Caitlin. So absolutely, Jamie McGuire's Beautiful Disaster. There is no way if I were to read that book today that I would give it 5 stars and love it. When at the time, I was like, this is so freaking good. Oh my gosh, this is so angsty. This is so messy. This is just so great. You know, like I loved it when I read it at the time, but now I think it would be a 1 star. I'm positive I would hate it. All of the mess that the author is aside, the book on its own, I think I would absolutely hate it because it's a trash fire. It's a complete trash fire. Nothing beautiful about it. Another book that I think I would rate completely differently is Thoughtless by S.C. Stevens. Like, I read that book and I freaking loved it, but even when I loved it, when I read it originally, I still feel like I was very aware that the writing quality was poor. And now, if I were to read that, I think that I would absolutely hate it. I am positive that I would hate it. So those are 2 books that I think I would feel completely different about. Okay, question number 6 is, how has your taste in romance evolved over the years? This one is by Bree. I really like this question, and I feel like it's interesting because this is a question you could ask yourself every single year and things would change. I think that as readers, we're constantly evolving and refining our tastes. And sometimes that means that we get into a little like period of time where we really like a certain thing and maybe we're overlooking other things, you know what I mean? Like overlooking like problems or flaws, that's what I mean by that. So I think that my taste in romance has evolved where earlier on in my romance reading journey, like when I was in my 20s, I'm going to use that as an example, early 20s, I really didn't even know a lot about anything. I'm sorry, but I mean, like, I look back on myself and I'm just like, wow, you were such a dumb little baby, you know? But I think that what I liked in romance was just something that was going to entertain me. And I don't necessarily feel like that meant it had to be over dramatic, although I did definitely like books better that were over dramatic. You know, like I really liked Colleen Hoover. I mean, all of those authors in that time, which that's what they were, over dramatic, extremely over dramatic, you know? Although I will say that even back then, there was a book that I read called Easy by Tamara Weber, which I freaking loved. I remember that book so fondly, like just absolutely loving it. And I think one of the things that I did love about that a lot was how emotionally vulnerable the hero was. And I think that's interesting because that's something that I really resonate with today, is seeing emotionally vulnerable men in romance. I just really, really love that, how they're willing to share and open up and they don't just feel constantly closed off and hard, you know, like I'm just so tired of that. That's such a tired trope, I feel like, in romance, that it's just so refreshing and delightful and lovely to read a hero who is not afraid to have feelings or express feelings or talk about them with the heroine. Like I just really love that. So that's something that I did really like in my earlier, I'm using the indie romance early phase, you know, like that was something that I liked, but I just kind of read whatever. I don't really feel like I had much preference for tropes or anything like that. If it was a romance and it had good reviews, like I would read it, you know. I was using Goodreads a lot. I wasn't like tracking my books because at that time I was embarrassed to be reading romance. I was embarrassed, but I was checking reviews and seeing what people were reading and what they were liking and all that good stuff. So now I would say that what I'm looking for in my romance right now is something that feels real. I want to feel like this is an actual scenario that could happen. That doesn't mean that it has to be realistic and like sad or realistic in everything that it depicts, but I love a romance that feels grounded in reality, that allows me to enter these pages and just completely suspend my disbelief and feel like this is something that could completely happen in real life right now. And it doesn't matter if it's something that's dark, it doesn't matter if it's historical, it doesn't matter if it's fantasy. I want to have that feeling of this feels real to me. So that's something that I think is really difficult to sell or pitch in a recommendation video or a recommendation list that you see on like Bookstagram or TikTok or anything like that. But that's something that I want. I want realness. I want to see some struggle. Not like absolutely devastating struggle all the time, sometimes, but I want to see the characters struggle to win and earn their love a lot. So yeah, I think that my taste in romance has definitely like refined, where I feel like it's pretty common to see romance readers start with something that's kind of light, fluffy, and then they kind of progress to something that's like super dark and like super taboo. Like I think that's a pretty common path that romance readers take. And I think that I don't necessarily want light and fluffy, and I don't necessarily want dark and taboo, but what I do want is really nuanced stories about love and romance in a way that sort of goes into the details of these people and how they got here and why they think the way they do and why they're behaving the way that they do and how they're going to try and fix this relationship or how they're going to try and win love. So I think what I want most in the world in my romances right now that I wasn't paying any attention to when I was, you know, just in my indie romance reading heyday is nuance, detail, emotion, small moments that say a lot. You know, I want the writing to be strong and powerful. I want it to be concise. I don't want it to be trying too hard. I don't want it to be overly flowery. I don't want it to be excessively wordy, whether that's because they're having a trouble, you know, reining in their descriptions, or if that's because they're trying to feel very literary and elevated and it just comes across as pretentious. You know, I want there to be a brevity in the word choice, because I feel like that lends power to the story. And that's why I always talk about writing, is because writing is what gets you to feel things. You know, you go to an art exhibit and you see paintings on the wall, and you're looking at this absolutely breathtaking painting, and it makes you feel things. It makes you feel things. It's an oil painting, and you don't know why it makes you feel things. I'm an artist, if you didn't know. I paint and stuff like that. But if you were to look at that painting up close, you would see very few brushstrokes. Something they teach you as an artist is to use economy of brushstrokes, because the fewer brushstrokes that you use, the less diluted your message and your picture is, and the more powerful it is. And that's exactly how I feel about writing. I want the words to be concise. I don't want it to be overly this way or overly that way. Like, I need it to be distilled down into something that really creates a powerful feeling. So I don't know how I ended up talking so much about that, but that's what I want in my romances right now. I want that type of writing. I want that type of feel, and it is extremely difficult to find. But when I do find it, like, put me in a grave, I will die happy, okay? All right. Next question, number 7. What is the most powerful romance book that left a lasting impact on you? So, of course, if you've been watching me for a while, you probably know what I'm going to talk about. I haven't mentioned this series in a while because I felt like I did not shut up about it when I first read this series. So, the most powerful romances that I have ever read in my life is the Grip trilogy by Kennedy Ryan. All 3 of them, but specifically Still. So, this is the trilogy. Flow is the prequel novella. Grip is the first book. Still is the final book, which you have to absolutely read. I feel like a lot of people stop at Grip. Don't do that. Move on to Still. You have to. So, this is the most powerful romance that left a lasting impact on me, and I only read it a few years ago. And that is because watching this couple from the very beginning in Flow, when we meet them and they just feel like this attraction, this spark, this connection that you can't really explain, there's something there about them that draws them together, where they just feel like, this is my person, this is who I'm supposed to have met, this is who I'm supposed to be with. And then through Grip, you see them sort of struggle and go through young phases in the relationship where, you know, other people maybe come in, or life or work or people, and it's hard to stay together, and they don't stay together entirely. They end up separated for a little bit, but they find their way back together. And then we get in Still. This is the final book. They get married, they're living their life, and they still have things that come up that threaten to tear them apart, that they have to work and overcome. And this book impacted me so much because of the way that Grip loved Bristol. I think that a future question is something about a future partner, so maybe I'll just combine that into this one. Question number 8 is, what was the romance book that told you this is what I'm looking for in a partner? This is by Jackie. I think that a lot of times people assume that, you know, we all joke about fictional men, they're all perfect, they do everything perfect, all this other stuff, things like that. Grip, I think, is a perfect man to be in a relationship with, but he's not a perfect man. But the way that he loves Bristol is perfect. And I think that so many times in real life, when things get hard, when things feel like everything's falling apart, when tragedy strikes, we often see relationships break down. They can't withstand the pressure. They can't withstand the sadness, the tragedy, the betrayal, whatever it is that hits them. They can't see it through. And I feel like that happens all too often in reality. And when I read this book and I watched how steadfast Grip was with Bristol, how he never, ever, ever thought at all, not even for a moment, about being unfaithful to her, about meeting his own needs first, about leaving her when she was really struggling. He never thought that. He was there for her no matter what. And to have that type of love for somebody that can withstand every single thing life will throw at you is what every person on this planet, I think, dreams of. You want to have that in a partner. So I think that, you know, romance really didn't shape what I was looking for in a partner. I've been married for 20 years. I love my husband. It never really played a part in trying to help me to determine what type of man I wanted to be married to forever. But this book definitely showed me how beautiful and powerful lasting love can be. even though they're not married for a lot of years, it's still really powerful to see how he stood by her, you know. I'm saying that because she's really the one who's going through the struggle and he's struggling with her, that's true, but also he's there supporting her. So I I just love this book. It will never ever leave me ever. And when I think about a romance book that shows you what a man should be like in your life, a romantic partner should be like in your life, I think it's Grip. And truthfully, I think it's every hero that Kennedy Ryan has ever written. I think they all are the type of men that any woman would be incredibly fortunate and grateful to have. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I don't know really how to answer that question because romance books didn't really tell me what or help me find my person. But if you're asking me, is there a fictional man that I feel like is something women should aspire to have in a partner? It's Grip. 100% Grip. Okay, question number 9 is, which romance would you recommend to a newbie romance reader? So this is a two-part question. The next one is, what would you recommend to a seasoned romance reader? This is by Ava. So a newbie romance reader. Let's see. Okay, so I, of course, had to pick a historical, and I picked this one by Stacey Reed, but truthfully, I feel like Stacey Reed would have great appeal to any new romance reader. And I also feel like if you are new to historical romance, I think she would be a good one. So often we recommend Tessa Dare, and she's fantastic. She absolutely is. But I think that Stacey Reed would work for someone just coming to romance because her writing is beautiful, her storytelling is solid, her romance is so swoony and steamy, but I don't think that it's necessarily like hardcore smut at all. It's just beautifully romantic. I think when I think about a romance I'd recommend to a newbie, I want to recommend something that's romantic. And Stacey Reed absolutely hits it for sure. So I would recommend this to somebody entirely new to romance and also somebody who is maybe a contemporary reader and wants to try historical romance. So this is Childhood Friends to Lovers. This man literally changed his entire life to win this woman, and it just kills me every single time I think about this book. I just am like, sigh. You know what I mean? Another book that I think would be a really good one is actually The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. So this is a contemporary romance, and I think this book is just entirely fun. I think it's so fun. It's very easy to read. We have a strong heroine. We have a broody, grumpy hero who is out of his mind in love with the heroine, but of course he like hides it forever and she doesn't know. It's very swoony. You have that classic trope of big giant man, tiny woman, which is just fun. Okay? It's just so fun, right? And I just loved it. I felt like it had a great story overall. I felt like the writing is super easily consumable, and it is romantic and swoony. And I think if you are new to romance, this would be a good one. I thought of this one because in a live I did recently, Chandler Ainsley was in the comments because I asked the question, what's a romance you would recommend to somebody who is new? And she recommended Love on the Brain, which is the second book of Ali Hazelwood's, and I agree with that for sure. But I personally enjoy The Love Hypothesis more, and that's probably because I associate this more closely with Raylo, which I also really, really love. So I chose this one. But Chandler is the one who put that idea in my head, and I thought, you know, that's perfect. That is actually a really great suggestion for a newbie romance reader. And the next one that I would recommend is Real by Kennedy Ryan. Look, you know I had to pick a Kennedy Ryan for sure, but I do think that some of her books deal with such heavy topics that I would not recommend them to a brand new romance reader. However, Real, I think, would be perfect for someone who's new to romance because not only is it deeply, deeply romantic and swoony and beautiful and just chef's kiss perfection, but it has a really beautiful historical side to it with the Black Renaissance, the musicians and things like that. The background plot of it I think is really beautiful, and I think that would appeal to a lot of readers who just want a really good story. I think that Kennedy Ryan is a very strong storyteller. I think all three of these books have strong storytelling in them, and that's another reason why I would recommend them to new readers, is because if it's a new romance reader, they probably are familiar with good storytelling, but you need a heavier romance element in there too. And I think all three of these authors do a good job of telling a good story and combining it with a great romance. Okay, so now the ones I would recommend to a seasoned romance reader. A seasoned romance reader. Okay, so I think that I forgot a book on my shelf. I wanted to mention this one. So a seasoned romance reader, I would probably recommend Entreat Me by Grace Draven. I think that a seasoned romance reader is someone who I don't necessarily think that, to me, that doesn't mean somebody who wants something that's super over the top. I think a seasoned romance reader is probably a little bit more able to consume romances that have varying levels of intensity. And so I think Entreat Me would be really good because it's beautifully written, very well written, excellent storytelling again. And I think that the combination of the Beauty and the Beast retelling, which is familiar in some ways but fresh in other ways, along with the romance of a more mature couple in here, would be very appealing to a seasoned romance reader. And I would also recommend Restore Me by J.L. Seegers. I just can't not recommend this book. I love it so much. So I would recommend this book to a seasoned romance reader because this book very specifically spends a lot of time in the characters' heads. You're going through their thought processes. You're really exploring the nuance of how they feel and how they feel about each other and the baggage that they're sort of overcoming. They both the hero and heroine have quite a bit of baggage they have to deal with. And I think that sort of layer of detail and nuance would really appeal to a seasoned romance reader who maybe hasn't found that in a lot of the quick, fast-paced romances. I think that this is the type of book that really allows and also sort of expects you to peel back the layers and be willing to do that to get this couple's full story. So that's why I think this would appeal to a seasoned romance reader, because it is very long, but the emotional and like the mental aspect that you get out of this book I think is very rewarding, and I definitely feel like this would appeal to a seasoned romance reader. Okay, and the last one that I have to recommend for a seasoned romance reader is, it's actually 2 books, and you do have to read both of them, but it is Deliver by Pam Godwin and Vanquish by Pam Godwin. Now, the one I really want the seasoned romance reader to read is Vanquish, but you don't get the full impact of that hero's redemption arc unless you read Deliver first, because he's the villain in Deliver. And Vanquish is when he gets his romance and his redemption arc, even though he is kind of a terrible human and does some really awful, awful things in the first book, and partly in the second book. But his redemption arc is literally one of the most satisfying redemption arcs I have ever read in romance. It is extremely dark, very triggering with all sorts of subjects, like sexual assault, sexual abuse, sex trafficking. This is not for the faint of heart, but it is so completely satisfying, I think, because it goes to that dark level, and specifically because it goes to that dark level and nuance is explored. It doesn't just go to that dark level for shock value. It goes there to talk about what's happening in the darkness to these people. And I just love that type of thing so much. So I think that if you are a seasoned romance reader and you are prepared for the head game that is Pam Godwin, I want you to read Vanquish, but in order to do that, you have to read Deliver first. So it's a two book one you have to do. Okay, so now this last question is, in your eyes, what are 3 perfect romances? Okay, so in your eyes, I think that's important because these are, in my opinion, these are 3 perfect romances. You might not agree, you probably won't agree, and that's okay, but I'm going to share them with you, 3 romances that I think are perfect. The first one is Day of the Duchess by Sarah MacLean. This, I think, is such a perfect romance in so many ways. It is absolutely swoony and romantic. Sarah MacLean, I think, writes some of the most romantic historicals that I've ever read. I think historicals by nature are just very romantic, and that's one reason why I love them so much. But this one specifically, I think, is perfect because the pacing is really great. The emotional connection between the two, the push and pull of, is she going to forgive him for cheating on her? Is he going to be able to win her back? Is just so glorious and just absolutely fun to read. But the thing that really, I think, makes this perfect for me, in all of the books I've picked, there's one aspect of it that I think is so perfectly done that I think says romance novel to me so perfectly that I included it. So in this one, it is the grand gesture of the hero, which I think frustrates a lot of readers because it's not what you want you don't want that to happen. But I love it personally because I think it shows to me what love really is, and that is sacrificing your own desires for your partner's happiness. It's putting down the thing that you want most, even if it's that person. If you want that person so badly, but you know they want something else, that's true love to me. And that's exactly what happened here. I loved it so much. I think this is her best book, and in my eyes, it's a perfect romance. Now I have another historical here. I'm sorry, I just couldn't help myself. So another romance that I think is perfect is A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall. I've talked about this book so much, and I will never stop talking about it. To me, this book is so deeply romantic, so beautiful, and layered, full of nuance. Just, oh, it's just so beautiful. Now, I hesitated to include this only because the technical part of my brain says that this is not a perfect book. There are parts of this book that are overly wordy that don't need to be that long. So I'm just putting that out there as a caveat. Not that I dare to even criticize Alexis Hall, who I think is an incredibly gifted writer, but it didn't bother me personally, but I could see that being bothersome for a lot of people. And the reason it didn't bother me is because this did something that I very rarely see in romance and I want to see more of, and that is the moment on page, words spoken between the hero and heroine, or between the love interests, that's a better way to say that, where it is expressed that you, the person I love you for who you are, every single thing about you. I love you for whatever flaws you think you have, for whatever failings you think you have, for whatever you're ashamed of, for whatever you're afraid of. I love you for all of those things. I love you entirely who you are right now. I love you and I accept you. I didn't mean to monologue, I'm so sorry. But I love that so much in this book. I want so badly to have more epically beautiful romances that say that type of thing, and the similar to The Day of the Duchess, that feel very romantic and selfless and accepting. I want to feel more love, and I feel like that's not the trend with romance anymore. I think the trend currently is shock and spice, and I just get so tired of it. And so this felt like such a beautiful breath of fresh air, and it was everything that I was looking for in a romance that I didn't know that I wanted. So to me, this book is perfect. And the last book, you knew I was going to include her, right? But do you know which one it is? Is Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan. So I think, in my eyes, this book is a perfect romance. And I think it's perfect for a couple of reasons. But one of them, very specifically, has to do with the very heavy, triggering content that is included in this book. So this book is often billed as a sports romance, and that's true. He's a basketball player. Sports romance. But overwhelmingly, it's about domestic violence and how that affects people, women specifically. How that affects women, how they find themselves in those situations, how difficult it is to leave, how oftentimes hopeless that feels. And I think that because of how this book so carefully and delicately, while never shying away from the cold, brutal reality of what domestic violence is, like, this is graphic on page domestic violence. It also sparks so much hope, I think, in so many readers. It's such a powerful message that even if bad, terrible things happen to you, you can still find a happily ever after. So to me, this is a perfect romance specifically because of that last thing, where it is the power of the happily ever after is available to every single person. It doesn't matter what's happened to you. It doesn't matter what you think you can't have, or what you think you are not great at, or how you think you look, or how you think you act. A happily ever after is available for you. And I feel like a lot of people, I think, hesitate to call this a romance because of the very traumatic journey that we take with Iris as she's trying to leave her abusive husband. But to me, the fact that she got through all of that and she reunited with the man that she felt that connection with in the beginning and got her happily ever after with him, that's what I think is a powerful, beautiful, perfect romance, because everything about this book it's only a romance because of that HEA, because she gets her happily ever after with the man she loves. I just love it so very much. Okay. Alright, there you go. I'm sorry this video was so long. Apparently I had a lot of things to say. But thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much, Becky, for including me in this video. And I just had such a great time and I hope that y'all enjoyed watching this. If you have made it this far, please leave me a rose for Valentine's Day, or a heart, a red heart or a red rose, whichever one is easier. And make sure to check out all the other channels. This is going to be a really fun day finding out about everybody's romance reading journey, and I'll see y'all in my next video.